Well, good morning, fam. It is another Unpublic on today, Monday, first day of the week. We are starting the week out with a little bit of nervousness because here in Minnesota we have this trial that you may have heard of. It's the trial of Derek Chauvin, and it's going to be wrapping up today, which could be a problem. The state is on high alert right now because we have more than one thing going on at a time. We have the end and the wrap up of the Derek Chauvin trial, which people are watching nationally and locally to find out what's going to be the outcome. And we also have a newer case of police, I don't know what you would call it, misconduct, abuse with the Daunte Wright murder by a police officer in Brooklyn Center, Minnesota. So activists, community members, clergy, the state is on high alert right now here in Minnesota. We have law enforcement assembling from across the country, at least from a couple other states. They're here in something called Operation Safety Net. The governor, Tim Walz here in Minnesota, has he has called out the National Guard, multiple police departments from across the state, and the help and aid of some law enforcement from other states that are here. They're creating barriers, perimeters, fences. There are tanks and military equipment, all for the outcome of the Derek Chauvin trial. And the worry that there's going to be violence. Good morning, Mama Toya Algarin. You're in the house. Good morning. Thank you for showing this morning. Kay, good to see you too. What I want to talk about today is, as all of this is going on in Minnesota, and it's not just happening here in Minnesota, but it's happening in other places in the country too, where we're having flare-ups of racial violence between police officers and communities at the hands of police officers. I should be clear about who has the power in those relationships. We're also having flare-ups at the same time in schools. And by flare-ups, I mean there are arguments between parents about what their kids should learn about the world that we live in and about this moment that we live in, and what kids should learn about the push for racial justice and the push for rights, specifically in this case for Black rights, which have never been solid in the United States. Toya says it's her birthday. Toya, good morning. Happy birthday. Good morning, Bill Conrad. Good to see you here also. So this brings up the question for me that I've covered before because it's staying on the top of my mind. We are having a cultural war within our schools right now about what kids should learn about race, racism, justice, prejudice, all of those things. There are places like Loudoun County in the United States where parents are actually forming groups and a pack to defeat the teaching of critical race theory in schools. And the arguments are pretty profound in that those school communities are splitting. I don't see much middle ground. They're splitting between parents who believe that social justice and racial justice should be taught in the schools in a way that's explicit about how race and racism works within systems and within the United States, the way that it works now, the way that it worked a half a century ago, and the way that it's always worked. They want to teach that as history and sociology and politics. But on the flip side, there are parents that are pushing back, and they are saying, we don't want our kids taught that America, for instance, one of the tenets of critical race theory, that America is a racist country. We don't want them believing that white people have done bad things to other people and that somehow makes them bad people. We don't want them taught these divisive ideologies, right? And it's even going so far now with a crop of anti-critical race journalists, bloggers, some who have even blogged under the banner of the organization that I work with, but are no longer with us. They are now starting to go into culture war territory to say that all of this talk about race and racism in society is turning to be reverse racism against white people and white kids. That's their new line of attack. So I'm in Minnesota. If you're a Minnesota teacher and right now your state has military people in the streets looking to suppress the protests of community members who have long-standing frustrations with the lax attitude about the killing of Black people and the over-policing, not just the killing. Killing is the thing that you all hear about nationally, but you don't hear very much about the over-policing within zones, within red line zones, areas of the state and areas of the Twin Cities that get more than their fair share of aggressive policing. As all of that's happening right now and going on, and by the way, journalists being arrested and in a couple of cases pepper sprayed and maced even after they have presented their credentials as journalists. At the same time, teachers have to go into classrooms and face young people who are living within these communities, and you have to have a message. In some ways, a teacher is, I don't want to say a spiritual guide, but a guide for critical thinking and understanding the world. So today is Monday. Today, a teacher showed up to school to teach kids. And that teacher is in this environment that we're talking about right now, most likely in Minnesota, like our police officers in the Twin Cities, I should say, in Minneapolis and St. Paul, at least a small majority of our teachers and police officers drive into the city every day. So they don't even live within the context of these kids that are living this out every day. So what do you say? What is your message? If you were the best teacher and you wanted to say something good about the state that you live in, what would you say? It's going to be even harder to figure that out if you have a mixed classroom where you have white kids from white parents that don't want their kids taught that any of this has anything to do with racism or race. Tanji is in the house. It's an easy, weak argument because they have no deep knowledge about U.S. history. Good to see you this morning. And I think, this is a good point about history, though. We teach history in schools, but there are people who are political parents, politicians, media folks, people who write the stories, who have very weak grasps on actually what has taken place to get us here where we are today. And in some ways, I think that that's a willful ignorance. That's on purpose. And when you fight to have your kids not taught the real history, what you are trying to do is preserve an ignorance that preserves power. So this white ignorance, this white kind of, well, I don't know anything about all that stuff. All I know is we're a great country and we're a great people. And the founding fathers are all of our founding fathers. And there's nothing wrong with the fact that we wrote 3/5 into the most foundational document of the United States, that we literally enumerated a people as being lesser than. That's not structural racism. That was just the way things were at the time. Bill Conrad says, white insurrectionists meet Capitol Police who are in shirt sleeves. Black Lives Matter supporters meet police and National Guard in full battle attire, armed to the teeth with tanks and tear gas and bullets. Now, this is a very good point, Bill, because and this is an original point. You've heard this before. Had thousands of Black people showed up to the Capitol threatening to break the doors down and to get in, and they were expressing that they wanted to get to the lawmakers who were in the Capitol making laws or doing the people's work. Let's say that happened and that turned into an absolute massacre. Instead of just letting them come on in and do what they wanted, the police were really aggressive and just really kind of shot everybody down or whatnot. Most of the coverage, I think, would be full of stories of people saying, well, if you hadn't tried to breach the Capitol, you wouldn't have died. If you hadn't been attacking the most important body within all of our government, you wouldn't have died. If you hadn't been insurrecting Black people, they wouldn't have had to put you down. They wouldn't have had to kill you. The fact that we haven't actually examined that enough is proof positive enough for me that we're living in two Americas. The old kind of saying 20, 30, 40 years ago about two Americas has never been more true than it is right now. It's not just that we're living in two Americas, we're living in two different American realities. And our kids are going into a building where those two very different realities are coming to a head and clashing. Bill Conrad says, two systems of justice in America, and he's spelling America with K's. Bill, you're going to get in trouble for that. Just look and you will see. Here's a couple things that I've done this before, so bear with me if you have seen me on this kind of talk track before, in this logic track. I'm going to share my screen here and add something. So, you know, if I were to talk about Minnesota, I just want to go back a few years and say this. I can remember a situation years ago where I was talking with an individual at an event that we were at, and it was a white Minneapolis person. And white Minneapolis people are very proud of their city, and they're very proud of the lifestyle, the schools, the system, everything in Minneapolis. And he said to me something, he had read something that I wrote, but he was like, I just, really want you to know Minneapolis is a really great city. And, I didn't want to get into it, but I said, yeah, for some, yeah, it is. And he followed that up with a very stern look at me and said, no, it really is a great city. And I let it rest, because I saw at that moment that his insistence, that his existence within the city was proof positive enough that it was great. But what I knew, especially doing social services and working with people in poverty and working with within the government in Minneapolis, I knew that there were two Minneapolises, just like we talk about two Minnesotas. So let's start here. Minnesota ranks tops, near the top, number 6 for best places to live in the United States in U.S. News and World Report. This is based upon the job market, the costs of homes and home sales, the quality of life, including things like crime, healthcare, education, commute time overall, desirability, and net migration. This isn't that long ago. This isn't this year, but I think it was last year before. The population is 3 million. The unemployment rate is a staggeringly low 2.7%. The average salary is about $56,000. Average median home price is $237,000. Now, just going to be real with you. Try and get anything in Minneapolis right now for $237,000. That's not that might be the median, but that's not actually the reality. And it's a young city. Median age about 36 years old. Average commute time about 25 minutes. So this is really, really great news about Minneapolis. The problem with that, though, is that is not the life that Black folks are living. The median Black family in the Twin Cities earns less than half of what the white family does. This income inequality gap is one of the largest in the nations. We have places that are worse. Wisconsin is the absolute worst place to live in the United States, but Minnesota and Minneapolis specifically are pretty high up there. And we're in the North. We have a liberal governor. We have a Democrat for governor. We have a Democrat lieutenant governor and commissioner of education and czar of everything. And in Minneapolis, you only have Democrats and progressives and left-leaning people. So how could this be? Before the pandemic, our Black unemployment rate was considered low nationally, but it was 3 times the unemployment rate for white folks in Minneapolis in the Twin Cities. Black poverty is 4 times what white poverty is here. In a very wealthy, very old school liberal place, we have serious inequities. Black folks in the Twin Cities are 11 times, the incarceration rate is 11 times that of what it is for white folks. So I'm going back to my main question here, though, is you see these things and you have to ask yourself, what do you teach, right? I am a teacher. I'm going into the classroom. I have kids, mostly of color. The demographics of the Minneapolis public schools, for instance, I believe are like 70% kids of color. That's down from like 75% kids of color. But you have to go in and you have to teach something. So what are you going to teach on Monday morning? Now, I'm throwing that question out to all of you in the timeline here, because this is a conversation. I don't want to preach at you what I think. You probably already know what I think about a lot of these things, but I do want to see some community or some thinking or some conversation around how do we settle this question. Some of you are Black, some of you are white, some of you believe America's the greatest country ever, some of you believe that it's a great country with flaws, some of you believe it's never been a great country. It could be great maybe one day, but as of right now, there's a lot of work to do. Wherever you fall, I would love to see in the conversation, in the comments here, where you land on that and what you want from your public schools. What do you want your kids specifically to be taught about these inequities? For instance, look at what I just told you. In Minneapolis and Minnesota, the inequality in a northern liberal state run by Democrats that couldn't be more kind of precious about its lakes and its bike trails and its social net, its social programs, couldn't be more in love with itself about all those things. And still, it produces results that you would more likely think would be, some southern state that you could write off as being backwards and not very college educated, not very liberal. Definitely not a state with more than its fair share of Fortune 500 corporations and more than its fair share of corporate jobs and money. Zakia is trolling me in the comments. She says, "You are making you're making my point about Democrats," which maybe I am. I mean, because I'm living in a democratic kingdom, and the outcomes for us are not great. They're not fantastic. I want to go back and just let me add a little bit of historic context to this, because this is answering part of my question. What do I think we should be telling kids? I'm going to play a video here. Let me share my screen, play a video here. And let me know if you can't hear it. Let me know in the comments.
The 1935 land use planning map used to define which place would get mortgages versus others circled these areas, called them slums, places where the quote unquote Negroes lived. These are places to avoid, right? So they're going to give you substandard housing and they're going to contain you. Access to affordable housing was a challenge. When you think about the reasons behind the creation of public housing, we had a lot of folks forced to the low wage sector. Right? And you're thinking about what jobs or opportunities that low-income folks of color even had access to at this time. I would argue that with the creation of public housing in 1938, the Sumner Field homes became this really interesting iteration of the redesign of space. You have 400 units of public housing, which were segregated at the time, created. In 1953, the City Council of Minneapolis refused to scatter another 1,000 units of public housing outside of the Sumner Field homes area. And where did these pressures come from? You had both internal conservative politicians and outlying suburban communities coming in saying, "Not in my neighborhood." And the City Council crumbled under the pressure and then took what was 400 units of public housing to over 1,000 units in less than a decade. They have strategically manufactured urban poverty.
I mean, that is such a deep quote. They have strategically manufactured urban poverty. If you looked at a map of Minneapolis, I wish I could find it. I went to look for one. They had drawn on the map places in the city for Negroes and Jews, and that was mostly the north side of Minneapolis. A sliver between the north side and the west side of the city, literally on it, it said Skid Row. And that's where the city was forcing single unemployed men to live. And in other places, it was like working class whites, but it didn't say working class whites. It said it was more like European, Western European. So these were the lower end white folks. There was a portion of the city for certain European countries that weren't like the it countries. They weren't the Anglo countries. And then they drew maps around other parts of the city that were closest to the lakes and made those green zones that had housing covenants where only white people could buy houses. The first Black person to buy a house in the area where George Floyd was killed, the first Black family that moved in, I don't think it was known that they were going to be Black people, and they moved in, and there was a riot and a rally. Hundreds of white folks showed up to their house and threw rocks and bottles and threatened to burn them out of the house. And it was a good old fashioned northern version of Jim Crow. And that's the way that the city of Minneapolis, with all of its "we're a great cityness," was designed. Now listen to this word, designed, right? What you just saw in that clip that I showed you, the federal government had a program that was expanding home ownership to working class people by creating the loans themselves rather than using banks, taking it out of the hands of banks. One way to get that loan was to buy within zones that the government had designated as one of 4 designations, but only 2 of them you could buy in, a green zone and a blue zone. And in those 2 zones, it was either considered on the rise, a neighborhood on the rise, or a fully white neighborhood. The 2 zones you couldn't buy in was a red line neighborhood, which were basically created on racial basis, meaning with infiltration of Negroes, your designation to be able to buy in that area went down. So Black people move in, the government wouldn't give you a loan. I'm saying design. That's by design. This is by policy. It's by law. It's by design. That means it's systemic. That means we should possibly be teaching our kids that racism isn't just individual prejudice between individuals, which is a stupid concept of racism, or believe what you want to believe about racism, that it's just about some guy being racist towards you. It's not just about the Klan burning crosses. It's about your government. Oh, by the way, it's the same government that runs your schools. So if you're sitting in a classroom and your teacher isn't telling you that she is an agent, or he is an agent of the same state that is invested in all of these systems that have done your people harm for years, you're abusing your position. You're either fulfilling your position or abusing it. And when I say you might be fulfilling it, you're fulfilling it in that I expect the state and the government to not tell you the truth about itself. But should our teachers teach what's really systemic about racism and about discrimination in the public schools? I want to show you another map here that kind of just furthers this same point. I'm going to beat the point till it's dead. This is a map of Minneapolis that shows where predominantly people of color are, where predominantly white people are, and where there were racial covenants for the housing. This is a story from Bloomberg. When Minneapolis segregated in the early 1900s, housing covenants in the Minnesota city blocked home sales to minorities, establishing patterns of inequality that persist today. If you're a good teacher, you're probably teaching your kids how the situation of today, the things like the Chauvin trial, the George Floyd, Daunte Wright, and others have a history. They didn't come out of a vacuum. They weren't just incidents where some people are poor and some people are not, and you can't figure out why. You don't know what happened. This is, again, adding to the point of these things having been systemic. In the 1900s, early 1900s in Minneapolis, the Near North neighborhood, which you can see here is this blue neighborhood, which has the is predominantly people of color. This is an area of the city where they quarantined Jews and Black people and any other minorities that came in that were dark, the darker minorities that came in. But And I want to add to this point. I don't think anybody knows this about Minneapolis, but Minneapolis was once considered the most anti-Semitic city in the country, in the nation. So you had a lot of very famous Jewish people that came out of this section of Minneapolis and went on to beat the oppression. But this area in the middle here, where you see high concentration of people of color, was one of the slivers of the city that was redlined, that was zoned out. And to the left of this is where you have $1 million homes and very expensive properties that had white covenants that wouldn't allow Black people to live. And that's why this is all very white here to the left. Now look at this. When I say a tale of two cities, this to the left is where all the housing covenants were and where white people lived, and where today, if you tried to buy a house, you can't afford it. I don't care how much money you make, you can't afford it. And this down here is considered Southwest Minneapolis, and they hold the majority of the political power when it comes to overrunning our school board, asking for things that are inequitable in terms of policy, school-based policies. And this up here to the left and to the north in Minneapolis is the exact opposite, right? That didn't start yesterday. That didn't come out of a vacuum. And if you were to come to our city right now, and I used to live down here in the middle to the bottom here, but I used to work throughout the city. I never saw police officers or interacted with police officers in all the time I lived in Minneapolis in any of these parts of the city. When I would do work up here in the north, I couldn't go a block or two without passing a police cruiser. The number of times that I got stopped in Minneapolis, all the times that I ever got stopped by police officers in Minneapolis, happened up here. And it was just a different attitude. It was like going to a different city, going to a different place. What should teachers teach about this? Should they teach this? Should they teach that this is an aberration, or should they teach that this is the thing that some people don't want, that it's part of a system? It's systemic. This blue didn't become blue by accident. And all of the conditions and the factors that happen to our children and to people within this blue zone here didn't happen by accident. That happened on purpose. Here's another look at the map from 1910. And you can see this is where they started really concentrating Blacks in the beginning of the century, and that spread more to the north. But again, you know, this was by design. This was based upon law and the federal government and housing covenants, and that has implications that still live on today. What I'd said earlier, I just wanted to make this point again. No Jews allowed was something that was a common kind of refrain in Minneapolis. Minnesota, northern place, with all our really liberal people, even back then were considered basically pretty liberal, had a weird kind of, a weird kind of anti-Jewish sentiment in the city. Can't figure it out. So, today, as we're talking about the Chauvin trial wrapping up, and there are teachers in classrooms that have to figure out what they're going to teach. What do you think that they should teach? Bill Conrad says, police protect whites, police treat Blacks as the enemy. Can't argue there. Is it systemic, though? Is it just individual police officers doing individual acts of racism that are isolated and not connected to each other? So why should we teach our kids to fear police officers? Or is it part of a system? Is it the case that maybe in Minneapolis, the police union president was a member of a motorcycle gang that the Anti-Defamation League has listed as a hate group? And he has been elected unanimously as their leader, the leader of Minneapolis police officers. He also was a big Trump supporter and has supported every kind of very conservative law and order type person to run for office, period. Should we teach kids that the intelligence agencies of the United States have determined that the military and the police, law enforcement, have been infiltrated by white nationalist hate groups, and that when you are being stopped, it's possible that you don't know who you're interacting with. You don't know what you're dealing with. Is that too far out of bounds? Should we not teach that? Gloria Carbo says, our children need to be taught our full history. I want them to learn the good, bad, and ugly. I grew up only being taught the white narrative, and I'm angry that I wasn't taught the full story, so I could help make better decisions for my community. We and our children deserve the truth, not propaganda. Until we know the full truth, we cannot be a healthy, just, and equitable society. Hear, hear. I mean, man, I can't do any better than that. We should be taught the good, the bad, the ugly, because if your goal is to raise thinking people who can think critically, specifically thinking people who can think about their government in ways that make them responsible voters and citizens and participants in a society, you have to have people being taught the full story, right? I think the fight right now, part of the fight is to teach a redacted version of history that favors white supremacy. So when I see the parents of Loudoun County and in other places who are freaking out about critical race theory, the idea that that their teachers may teach their kids that white America benefited greatly from years and years and years of structural oppression of Black people. It's an indisputable claim. It cannot be refuted without a fair look at history, housing covenants, the GI Bill, housing tracts, period, employment discrimination, discrimination within the unions, right? An entire working class white America actually did work hard to become who they became. And they worked hard within a context of a system that constantly favored them earning the fruit of their labor. So I can see that for some parents, it might not be in their best interest to have you learn all of these things, because why? You might have to do something about it. If I tell you that we've done something wrong, the way that we've all been raised, I hope that we've been raised, is when you do something wrong, you have to do something right. When you make a mistake, you have to correct it. When you oppress a people for years and years and years, making it right doesn't mean, oh, we're just going to stop doing that now today. We're not going to do that anymore, but all bets are off in terms of fixing the problem. And I think that's what people don't want to deal with. They don't want you admitting to anything that puts society on the hook, specifically white society on the hook, for any type of compensation, reparations, restoration, fixing of the problem. They want a racial amnesia. And I've said this many times, white supremacy is a self-cleaning oven. It does bad and does dirt, it cleans and it moves on. And you would never know that what had happened before, because it never stains itself. It never leaves a stain. That's been true for Native Americans. That's been true for Black people. That's been true for colonized African countries. What do I want my teachers teaching my kids about this? What do I want them saying about this? And are they qualified to teach the real story? I guess I should ask that too. Bill Conrad says, when you live in your white enclave, the police oppression in Black communities is invisible to you. That's very interesting. And I believe that to be true. There is a way to live with social blinders on, where you can't see kind of like the oppression of others, so therefore it doesn't exist. It's a very juvenile thing. I shouldn't even say juvenile. And someone in my comments, when I make comments like this, I know you're going to come back to me and fix me on whatever I say here, but I believe that I've read multiple times that there's this theory, and I can't remember the name of it, if it's even a theory. It's a thing with toddlers, that when they cover their eyes and they play peekaboo, that literally they believe that everything disappears. They don't believe that they just have their hands over their eyes. They literally believe like everything in the world goes someplace because they put their hands over their eyes. There's a name for it. I don't know what the name for it is. I can't think of it on the spot. But to Bill's point, if you have social blinders on that are created by a built environment that excludes other people, like a suburb. So you have millions of people after Levittown and other suburbanization of America. You have millions of people who move to these enclaves that have housing covenants that have no Black people and no brown people around, and they build these little civic societies that have schools that are just for them, and parks that are just for them, and roads that are really well paved and don't look anything like that dirty, grimy city. That's the equivalent of the blinders to the rest of the world. Now, you can be a mature person and say, I'm not stupid, so I grew up in Pleasantville and I know all this around me. But I'm a thinking person and I can feel other people's pain. I understand that that's not the way that everybody grew up, but that's actually not really what that type of segregation breeded for those folks. A couple of generations of folks who are like, no, my country's great. My schools are great. My systems are great. My teachers are awesome. My police officers and firefighters are amazing. It's worked out for me really well. What do I want those people who are oftentimes now our teachers teaching our kids about the structure of opportunity in the United States? Tanji says, the white narrative is good and bad. All of it must be taught. Having a thinking society is actually not the goal. Is not the goal. Wow, wait. Tanji, you're blowing me away here. Having a thinking society is not the goal. Providing society with a set of workers to fill certain roles is more the goal. Okay, I get you. Okay. Now you're tapping into my cynicism. So I'm with you now. So you're basically saying that the reason that you might not teach the full truth is because the goal isn't really in education to produce thinking people, because that could be dangerous for the powers that be. But the goal is actually to create a set of obedient citizens, which I'm putting words in your mouth a little bit, but that's where I totally agree with this. Joy S. Jones says that there's this documentary, and it's an excellent crash course. Thank you for sharing, Joy, by the way. I appreciate when you all share resources. She says that there's this excellent documentary course in the global self-cleaning oven of white supremacy. It's Raoul Peck's Exterminate All the Brutes. I will look for it. I will watch it. I appreciate it. Joy. Bill Conrad says systemic racism is embedded into education, health, economics, politics, criminal justice system, and on and on and on. It's a self-similar. I don't know what that means. It's a self-similar. You see the same patterns in multiple societal elements. That's what I want my kids taught. Not because it's an ideology that I agree with, but because it's empirical fact. Yeah. So what happens if we have a situation where large groups of parents, community members, even educators start disagreeing with teaching these things that are what I'm calling empirical fact? It is an empirical fact that there is racism within the system. And this is all that critical race theory is positing. The only thing that it's asserting really is that if you look at the systems of America that guide almost all life activity, you will find patterns of discrimination that favor white and disfavor everybody else. And there is no way to look at what Bill Conrad is saying here, the education system, the health system, economic system, the political system, the criminal justice system, and not see that to be true, right? There's no way to look at the rising influence of Black and brown voters in the United States that coincides with a reduction in the number of polling places in Black areas and a reduction in the number of, or an increase in the number of restrictions of who can vote, surgically created to affect those specific populations more than others, and not consider that to be systemic and in support of a critical race theory. Look at your Congress. Look at your congressional interns. Look at your governors of the states. How could you not believe that there's something that is systemic about who gets ahead and who doesn't in the United States. I wanted to go back. I saw another well, I can't find it now. I had seen another point come up. Tanae says, hell, I mean, at this point, teachers can watch a few documentaries and make connections over time and then incorporate that into their lessons. I think this is a good point. What should we do? What should teachers do to self-educate themselves and to create lessons that are relevant to the real world of the students that they have, especially if they don't share kind of the background of those students, and might have to do some self-work themselves to learn more about what is going on in this world. Tanji says the actual use of the words race theory. I don't know what you mean by that, Tanji, but I do know that the use of the words race theory causes part of the problem that we have now, the cultural problems that we're having. Loudoun County, I mentioned them. I shouldn't have just thrown that out there like it's one place that has this going on. I'm only mentioning it there because that's one of the richest places, one of the richest counties in the world, or at least in the United States. And they have a really fever-pitched battle right now, but those battles are happening all over the place. Wherever there are white parents that are assembled in any sizable numbers who have kids that are starting to be taught things that come from the critical race theory camp, you're seeing these things flare up. Michelle Johnson says it's unrealistic to think that what took hundreds of years to put in place would disappear with the stroke of a pen. I think I would agree. I think for us to get out of long-standing patterns of structural racism and oppression and just the structural artifacts that give us a situation where we don't have the society that we want and that we know we should have for a very diverse country. The only way that we can get out of that is by creating educated people. Educated people are the ones who I think can make the society better, can heal things, could be effective leaders, can be effective elected leaders. I see us as in a race to the bottom, intellectually speaking, right now. People are like reverting to their base instincts to keep power and maintain power. And to do so, they are buying into some of the weirdest, most bizarre intellectual products from right-wing media, and I want to always be balanced. I want to say maybe, there's some left-wing media stuff happening there, but I don't believe in both siderism. I just don't. If you're dumb, you're dumb. And right-wing media right now is actually making people dumber by the day. And I'm just going to put it out there and say it. And teachers are part of that. In Loudoun County, where that revolt is going on, part of that is stoked by teachers, white teachers, who don't want to teach anything about systemic racism or the structure of America being off. Tanji says teachers can be quite subversive in their pedagogies by teaching the information without using the words. The information is available and proven to be factual. Now, I would love to see an example of that. Teachers who know how to be subversive so that they can escape some of the backlash or the blowback that would come from being on the nose when it comes to systemic racism. Again, folks, I just want to keep asking the same question, though. Like, what do we want our teachers teaching our kids? Do we want them teaching them facts about the history and the nature of the country that they live in? Or do we want them teaching some approved version of that redacts some of the most persistent and worse barriers to a free society? Do we want to use schools as some sort of battleground where we get to fight out things that we believe in as adults and parents, so that it's not really about truth telling, and it's not really about education, and it's not really about informing the next generation about what previous generations did well and did wrong, so that there's a full story. Tanji says, I was one of those teachers when I taught in the South. Ooh, well, that's interesting. You should have came up north, Tanji. At this point, the stuff that we have going on in Minnesota, I think kind of rivals anything that people think about the South. Here's, I want to come back to current times again. I want to talk about urgency, like why I see some of this as urgent to teach kids about what's really going on in the world. So I just want to tell you, I mentioned earlier, Operation Safety Net is right now the full court press that our progressive Democrat governor has going on right now. Minnesota Operation Safety Net is the collection of the military and law enforcement from across our state and from other places that are now here to keep the order. Now that we're going to have a result in the Chauvin trial, and now that we have people that are out protesting Daunte Wright's murder. And this Operation Safety Net has an official Twitter handle, and it's the official source of public safety information for the trial of former police officer Derek Chauvin. So why would the official public safety, the official source for public safety information follow white supremacist organizations that are tweeting out things like BLM is a terrorist organization, BLM and Antifa are nothing but paid thugs that need to be taken down by force? Tell me why they would be following that. Why would they be following right-wing social media activists who are saying things like Antifa and BLM instantly regretted confronting, is what it's supposed to say, DC police last night? Why would the official public safety Twitter handle be following organizations like this? It's weird. It's almost as if they're condoning it and they're part of a system. I wonder what our teachers should be telling us about, like the weird kind of thing that we do with when Black people die and they're dead Black people. We start indicting them for their own murder. What should a teacher teach young people about the fact that Breonna Taylor was asleep when the police executed the wrong warrant? I wonder what they should teach us about the fact that Kim Potter shot a Black man, and seconds after it was like, oops a daisy. Oh my God, I had the wrong, I thought it was my taser. Oops a daisy. You can hear her seconds after shooting him exclaiming kind of like, oh man, I shot him. It was with my gun. And it's almost like, I left my cell phone at home. Oh, geez. Oh, geez. I shot the guy. Oh, geez. What should we teach our kids about? Tamir Rice. Police officer jumps out of his car and in seconds makes a split-second decision that leaves a 12-year-old dead for carrying a toy gun. Oops-a-daisy. Oh, yeah, oops-a-daisy. What should we learn about these? What should our teachers be telling our kids about the fact that you have Capitol rioters who have been released to go home on their own recognizance? And in one case, the shaman guy that they kept in jail, they're feeding him organic food because he's got an organic diet. One shooter that they brought in alive who killed 9 Black people in a church, they bought him Burger King on the way to jail. Kyle Rittenhouse, a 17-year-old who goes fully armed to a place where he doesn't belong and shouldn't be, ends up killing 2 people, and police officers and anonymous celebrities send money. They donate to him. He's 17. He's a hero. He killed 2 people. Not only did he kill 2 people, he ran down the street fully armed after killing 2 people, put his hands up to the police officers, and they they went right by him, right? What about the woman who stormed the Capitol, stole Nancy Pelosi's laptop, and tried to sell it to Russians, to a foreign government? Grown-ass woman. And the judge released her to the custody of her mother. What about the white killer who's having a bad day, targeting Asian women, whatnot? Police officer says he's having a bad day. What should teachers be teaching us about these weird kind of this dual society that we live in? I want to show you this, and this is the last thing that I'm going to add, and that I'll just add for color and for reference about Minnesota for those of you who aren't here. Look at this. So there are 3 columns here. To the left column, it says Minneapolis Public Schools, and these 3 columns are Minneapolis Public Schools, the St. Paul Public School District, and the Brooklyn Center School District, where Daunte Wright lived, or at least where he lost his life, where he was killed. Minneapolis Public Schools, this column right here is 2019. 54% of students do not meet the state standards in math. Another 20% only partially meets, and if you're doing math there, so that's 75%. 20% meets, and 4% exceeds, and this is Black students in Minneapolis. This is Black students in St. Paul. It's just about the same thing. Let's just consider gray and this aquamarine color here as bad. And these 2 colors, that's the majority, the overwhelming majority of Black students. Brooklyn Center is even worse. So that's what you got going on in the Twin Cities. Now, this is all Black, by the way. If I were to cut this by Black male or by Black folks who receive, who are part of free and reduced lunch, these numbers would be even worse. And here's the white kids. So this is Minneapolis. This is, white kids in Minneapolis. Remember I said gray and aquamarine are bad. So this is white kids in Minneapolis. This is Black kids in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and Brooklyn Center. White kids, Black kids. That's 2 Americas, folks. That's 2 very different Americas. And again, I want to put this within the context of this is in a liberal city, or liberal cities, I should say, run by progressive Democrats. St. Paul has a Black mayor, a young Black mayor who's doing really great and innovative things with universal basic income and others. Minneapolis has a young flyboy white guy, Justin Trudeau type. When the George Floyd stuff set off a while ago, there were whole Twitter threads dedicated to how, hot and cool and young Minneapolis's mayor was, until that kind of went south on him with all the riots and everything. Our governor, our lieutenant governor, our commissioner of education, our leader of the statewide teachers union, our local teachers union, white progressives, Democrats, super left progressives, Democrats, overlooking a system that couldn't be producing more unjust and really terrible outcomes that are needless, meaning we're not poor, we're not as backwards in our social systems as we could be. We just have a problem that is systemic that should be taken care of. So I'll end here. I don't know if anybody actually wants to put in the comments, do you think our teachers should explicitly be teaching about the systemic nature of racial oppression in the United States, that they should be linking it to history and showing the pattern through factual data and factual information that shows that white Americans have in the past and do today still benefit from a system that disfavors non-whites. And that's in banking, and finance, and law, and education, and government, the courts, almost any system. And as I said in a previous show about this, if you believe that they should be teaching that, then you believe what CRT tells us. And CRT to me could be considered as a theory, critical race theory. But honestly, if we're just being very simple people about it, all it's saying is that you can study systems to find out whether or not they have evidence or proof of discrimination against individuals. And the only reason not to do that is that you want things to remain the same. You might be a person who's benefiting from the unequal society. And because you are benefiting from the unequal society, you don't want no fancy book learning getting in the way of your good deal that you have right now. And if that is the case, then you should be fired. And if that is the case, you should be fought. And we don't have to all agree on this. So if you want to be like the Loudoun County parents, I'm okay with segregation. Segregate yourselves, teach your kid whatever dumb story, but we're coming for you. We're going to teach our kids the truth. And we're definitely going to teach my kids the truth so that they can be good citizens. And by good citizens, I mean ones who act with facts, ones who see the world for what it is and attempt to make it better, but not ones who see what benefits they are drawing from an unequal society and want to continue it. And that's where I'm going to end today. I appreciate you all spending this hour with me. Looks like we had a sizable number of you this morning. Again, I appreciate you all. Bill Conrad, Toni Morrison, Tanji, Michelle Johnson. This feels like Romper Room. Some of you are not old enough to remember Romper Room, where I think it was either at the end or the beginning, the woman who ran Romper Room would look through her magic mirror and she would say, I see Julie and I see William and I see, and she would go down the list of all the kids she sees. And as a kid, you would just want to hear your name called out. She never did Christopher. And I never forgave her for it. Never did Christopher. But anyways, so I see Tanji and Angela and Bill and Michelle and Mama Toya was here this morning. Tanae, T.A. Morris. I could keep going down the list, but I see you. I appreciate you for being here in the morning. Elaine is here as well. Okay, I see you, Elaine Wells. I'm better than Romper Room. Thank you for caring so much about our kids. Thank you for caring about education. Thank you for sharing and hearing me out. And I would love to hear you out. If you have any show ideas, send them to my email address, citizen@hey.com. And that's on, that has been on the screen. You can also find me on Twitter, and my handle on Twitter is @CitizenStewart. If you like the show, actually click like and share it with friends. I want to grow the show. I want to build community around these ideas, that we can be better, and we can raise the revolution. We can raise a nation of kids that are healthy and educated and want to be a part of a just society. Angela Ryans, thank you so much. You rock as well. I just see you pop up there. We'll see you tomorrow. We have another good discussion. I'm still working on it, so I won't tell you about it right now, but we'll see you tomorrow, 9 o'clock Central, as we do every day here at The Unpublic. Appreciate you so much. Thank you.